we've got a major shift about to happen towards campus-style distributed hub-based workplaces from CBD-placed workplaces. It's dramatic. And you think Sydney's an issue. What if you're at Tokyo? What do you do if you're in Tokyo?
Right, Tokyo's extremely polycentric, more than Sydney, but it's extremely public transport dependent.
But the total number of people moving around is dramatically higher than here. So
yep. All right, we're gonna in about 3 minutes. Cass is gonna put a resting slide on, and people will start flooding in. So you will be visible. So, yeah.
Just sit quietly.
Go time.
3 minutes,
You
and
can
then
look like
people will start talking.
television anchors reading your important papers. Okay, I'm going to mute my video, but I'll come back on in 4 minutes.
Whoa, Geoff, how are you today? Good morning, Greater Sydney.
No, there are some things that I miss, one of which is performing.
Right, so I'm just going to go live now. So I'll start sharing my screen, and in about 3 or 4 minutes, Gabriel will start speaking.
All right, hello everybody. I'm gonna get started now. Thank you for joining today's edition of Committee for Sydney Live. I'm Gabriel Metcalf, CEO of the Committee for Sydney. Today, it is our great pleasure to feature Geoff Roberts and Sarah Hill of the Greater Sydney Commission for a briefing on the GSC's thoughts about planning for recovery. Geoff and Sarah would be very well known to members of the committee. They are two of our closest collaborators on all kinds of issues. The work that the GSC has been doing over these past years to set Sydney up for the future in many ways now sets Sydney up for economic recovery. I am going to give you a little biographical sketch and then turn it over to Geoff and Sarah. In the end, you can, after the remarks, you can submit questions via the Q&A app on Zoom, and I will do my best to sort through them. Geoff Roberts was appointed Chief Commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission in March of 2020. So congratulations to Geoff. Previously, he was Deputy Chief Commissioner and Economic Commissioner. He has 35 years of experience in Australia and internationally, working on city strategy, governance, and leadership. He led the negotiation of the Western Sydney City deal for New South Wales government and played a pivotal role in this tri-government agreement reached in 2018. Sarah Hill began as the inaugural CEO of the GSC in January of 2016. She has led the organization in developing the Commission's vision for a metropolis of 3 cities, as well as the 5 districts plans adopted in March of 2018. Previously, Sarah specialized as an economic planner with expertise in employment economics and affordable housing. Thank you both for taking time out from your schedules for this briefing. I'll turn it over to you now.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'd like to start by acknowledging country and various lands on which we virtually meet today. I myself am on Gadigal land, and I'd like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people, the elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to welcome all of you joining us today and also acknowledge a number of our commissioners who are online. Today, I'll be sharing with you some research from the Commission on the implications of COVID-19 to our city and really how our relationship with our city has changed significantly over the last 9 weeks. Our thinking at the Commission has been informed by our discussions with our national and international counterparts, but also our colleagues across government who are dealing with these implications as they arise in real time. I'll then hand over to our new Chief Commissioner, Geoff Roberts, to share with you some new thinking about our priorities for the Commission, some new ideas that he's developed in light of the shifts that I mentioned. But first, a few words from me. COVID-19 has primarily taught us how fragile our city ecosystem is. I think this is most succinctly and powerfully explained by Stephen Kennedy, Secretary of Commonwealth Treasury, when he said, "We've never seen an economic shock of this speed, magnitude and shape," reflecting that this is both a significant supply and demand shock. COVID-19 has been the ultimate disruptor. COVID-19 has, however, taught us the value of our local areas. Many of us have very much shifted our pattern of movement across the city, whether it's working from home in our lounge rooms or our bedrooms, getting our morning coffee regularly from our local bakery, actually acknowledging our neighbours as we escape from our homes to exercise, and teaching our kids how to ride bikes, battling for pavement space as the next generation of cyclists are born and raised. Our relationship with our city has become that of the 5-minute neighbourhood. At the Commission, we believe the positives of these behavioural shifts should be maximised. Indeed, we have a duty as city planners to lock many of these positives of this situation into the function of our city. and as we transition out of COVID-19 to the post-normal to maximise the opportunities. As I mentioned, we have looked to our counterparts internationally who are at varying points along this recovery journey. The question really becomes, where is Greater Sydney on this journey? And how our comparative success in the city governance and management of the virus to date can be leveraged to accelerate our recovery by giving us a competitive edge. Indeed, Greater Sydney's comparative to other global cities has seen a resurgence in its reputation following the challenges of the bushfires earlier this year. Of course, all global cities are currently debating this point. They're asking, how can they grow back better, greener, smarter? But rather than reinvent ourselves as many cities are aiming to, we are in the enviable position of having a city framework which works. At the GSC, we're asking, how can we optimise the positive behavioural shifts generated by this situation to accelerate towards the three cities vision we have collectively signed up to? A vision our recent situation has proved to be more important than ever. To help see the silver lining in this situation in a pragmatic way, we have agreement across all government clusters to collectively work on answering the following four questions. I'm now going to spend a few minutes touching on some early research and thoughts around these four questions before I hand over to Geoff. So the first one is how the city and our habits have changed over the past 9 weeks. Well, we've certainly seen changing retail habits. Many of you have seen the graphs, which with a significant divergence between grocery and other retail spend. On the positive, it's been better than Christmas if you sell puzzles, gym equipment, coffee, groceries, alcohol or hardware. On the downside though, our high streets, our nighttime economy, the arts and culture sector, tourism and international trade are all suffering significantly. There's been significant job losses and a substantial rise in underemployment, with our youth, women and over 55s most affected. Isolation has also exacerbated many of our mental challenges and mental health issues, with Lifeline alone experiencing a 25% increase in calls in March and Beyond Blue a 40% increase in April. And we're now experiencing a new division across our city with a line of disadvantage related to digital connectivity. For example, in parts of the southwest of Greater Sydney, some households don't have access to the internet, and indeed about 40% are recorded in some suburbs to have access. And this is not ending anytime soon, with consumer and business confidence a major lead indicator in nosedive. There are, however, positives. We have successfully changed our behaviours around e-health, commuting to work, reducing traffic congestion, and becoming more present in the local with staycations, greater kindness and awareness of our neighbours and local communities. It took me and my kids a while to work it out, but the bear hunt is just an example of how we've shifted our approach to make the best of the situation. Anecdotally, we've increased our use of our city's green spaces, but we're using them in different ways. We're now using them more for running, walking, and cycling, rather than picnics and weekend sport. Unequal access to the green space across the city is another issue, though, that we need to address, with only 58% of residents in the Western City District being within walking distance of open space. We're also looking at new ways of thinking around the supply chain, fintech, cleantech, e-commerce, and the value of industrial areas and local manufacturing. More on that in a moment. And of course, interest in the global web has grown substantially, with 80% of us now consuming more media, mostly video, to inform and to distract, with millennials watching the most food recipes and baby boomers turning to TV news. Now, notwithstanding the positives, there are many things we'd like to see to revert back to the normal. For example, education. It's good for the economy, children and parents, for kids to be back in school, but it's certainly good for parent sanity as well. We want to see businesses reopened and fully operational, but we need to know how to do this in a COVID-safe way. We need to reduce anxiety and health concerns. According to the ABS, 68% of Australians were concerned about their personal health at the start of April. We also need to reinstate travel to the regions, domestic tourism, and in time, international. When we asked our youth committee about some of the positives and some of the things that they would like to revert back to normal, they raised the issue of job availability being a particular challenge for our youth, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. They also wanted to see better behaviour towards our essential workers and less racism towards those with Asian backgrounds. And certainly getting back to our extracurricular activities, getting back outdoors to markets and festivals. On to the third question though, there are many changes we would like to retain and indeed optimise. For example, early surveys of companies identify many people want to retain new ways of working. That is, not going back to the 5 days a week in the office, rather a balance of remote, virtual and face-to-face working. This theoretically will help us to continue to reduce traffic congestion, manage our workspaces, many limiting factors that we have, such as lift capacity, increase personal and family time and decrease business overheads. We want to reclaim our streets, working closely with the Committee for Sydney in this space and the great work that they have led. Locking in the recent traffic calming improvements, increased rates of recreational cycling and increased pedestrian space. But we also need to retrofit our neighbourhoods to address our new ways of working, make sure we have the right services and facilities locally, and ensure that we can retrofit our retail and make sure that they're fit for purpose going forward. We also want better hygiene to build back greener, smarter and more digitally connected, increasing our city's economic and environmental resilience. But we also want to diversify the supply chain of critical goods and build the resilience of our city and its economy. Now, lastly, we must be honest that there are many unknowns and many scenarios that we need to address as we go forward. For example, will there be a reluctance for citizens to re-engage fully in busy city life? For example, will we see a flight from the city, a more blended city approach as put forward by Greg Clark, or patterns of distributed urbanism? Will there be a battle between agglomeration versus COVID-safe locations for work? Will our higher density city areas be the reserve of the young and the risk averse? Will we continue to see a greater focus on places, connections and local neighbourhoods? And what does this mean for the viability of public transport and local neighbourhoods? What does this mean for freight and delivery movements across the city or simply curbside parking? What does retail as a service mean for our high streets and demand for retail floor space? Is the flexible workstation dead? Will we have more remote working? Do we need more or less commercial space, or will these trends equal themselves out? How can we build back not just bigger but greener? And what does this mean for the sharing economy? Is it dead? What are the social inequities created by this situation, such as access to digital infrastructure and equipment? The most vulnerable are indeed the least likely to be able to work from home. What does this mean for social isolation and mental health? Will there be a demand for a higher standard of experience and hygiene with our infrastructure, our public spaces? And will there be a growing demand for meanwhile uses? What will be the highest and best use in metropolitan core areas, and how do we use tourist-dependent areas temporarily? Well, lots of questions, lots of this will play out over time, but we also see opportunity alongside change and disruption. I hope you do too, and these questions have sparked some thinking. And now I'm going to hand over to Geoff Roberts, who's certainly been doing a lot of thinking in this space as we develop our research. Geoff's going to share with you now some ideas for the Commission and how we can progress our city and support its economic recovery. Over to you, Geoff.
Hey, thanks, Sarah, and welcome everybody today. I wanted to really share with you where I think the Commission should spend its time and perhaps what its priorities should be over the next critical 6, 12, 18 months as we move into recovery mode. Just a couple of facts for the people on the line. We report to the Premier of New South Wales about 18 months ago our reporting changed inside the government from the Minister for Planning to the Premier. And we obviously have our own act. We are the Metropolitan Planners for Sydney. But in the next period, I want us to focus on what the biggest problems that face our city, and without a shadow of a doubt, in our view, the biggest problem that we need to play a role in is really around economics and the economics of place. Now, the economics of place has a very strong social and environmental component to it, but last week having 584,000 people out of work in the month of April across our country is a catastrophic outcome that we just can't stand by and watch. So as the strategic planners of Sydney, we really want to pivot into how we can use this opportunity to really implement the three cities logic, the distributed jobs, the more people living and working closer together, which is the strategic scaffolding that we've all been developing over the last 4 or 5 years. So a couple of other sort of meta issues here. I've only been the Chief Commissioner for 6 weeks, and I do need to acknowledge Lucy Turnbull, the inaugural Chief Commissioner, and prior to that, the Chair of the Committee for Sydney. Lucy did a wonderful job in setting the Commission up, and she presided over the district plans and the region plans coming to fruition so promptly in the last 4 years. But really now, in the way that I see the world playing out, is it's about implementation. I don't want us to be confused with our role and DPI's role. Many of you will know we were created in the previous Department of Planning reporting to the Minister. It's now time, with the new Secretary Jim Betts and the leadership team in the Department of Planning, to enable and help them deliver the roles that they have. The Commission really, in my view, and we've had a lot of conversations with Sarah and the Commissioners, is really about getting the economics of metropolitan Sydney better organised. So there are really 5 priorities that I'm focusing on and talking to government and to a lot of people in the industry at the moment that I think we should be focusing on. At the moment, we have a priorities letter from the Premier that has 23 priorities in it. I would like us over the next few weeks to renegotiate, if you like, our contract with government to 4 or 5 critical issues. So those 4 or 5 at this point in time that we are discussing and that I'm leading that conversation are as follows. The first is, and you just heard our stellar CEO talk about this, is really to be the central source of truth of what the post-COVID-19 Sydney looks like. What are the data sets? What is the single source of truth of, if you like, the state of Sydney or the state of the cities report about Sydney? Now, we haven't got time for perfection here. In order to be useful in terms of policy and infrastructure prioritisation, we really think that well before the end of the year, we need to be informing government of all the data sets that are around that help us predict the future scenarios of Sydney, the future growth of Sydney, and particular the jobs, the distribution of jobs in Sydney. So this document we would initially see as a government report. We would then recommend to government that that be available to all. I would strongly encourage anybody listening today, and I know there are a number of people online who themselves hold data. We would love you to share that data with us so that there can be a single place where all of the data, good and bad, around Sydney is shared. So that's the first priority, to be the place where data, the single source of data, is held for Sydney. The second priority that I'm very keen for us to focus on is around utilities reform. Now, in a sense, we don't really have to argue this very strongly, because the Commission is already providing advice to government on multi-utility reform in Western Sydney. But if we just take a step back for a minute, of all the reforms that we've done in the last 10 or 20 years in Sydney, we really, at its core, are still delivering infrastructure more or less the way we were 20 years ago. We have large institutionalised organisations. We perhaps are delivering silos of excellence across water, energy, comms, digital enablement, and we have structural issues in our city that frankly have been around since I was at the beginning of my career 40 years ago. We don't really manage the water cycle particularly well in an integrated system. In Western Sydney, the base case would be that we hurtling down separate corridors for separate delivery of separate utilities. Surely that is not the most innovative way of thinking about utilities, let alone thinking about people and about customers and about single bills and environmental outcomes of multi-utility reform. So the first priority is around data, and the second priority is really to bring the utilities reform agenda into the city-making agenda. The third one is very, very important to me and to Sarah and our commissioners, which is really to lock in our advanced manufacturing potential in Sydney. Now, I, not only for my sins, am the Chief Commissioner. Inside Treasury, I also am the Global Head of Relationships for the deal pipeline for New South Wales and Sydney. Now, in that space, I manage all the direct foreign investments and national investments that come into the government. Now, what I can share with you today in that space is that the depth of the deal pipeline in the month of April doubled. Now, it's patchy. There are some sectors where the momentum is moving away from us, but there are some sectors where the momentum is moving to us at 100 miles an hour. And we really need to be ready for this, because these are the sticky jobs, the knowledge-intensive jobs for the future of Sydney. So the sectors where momentum is moving away from us are typically in those sectors that trade in capital. So the R&D and innovation platforms that we were negotiating with the large global banks of the world, the momentum is moving away over the last 8 to 10 weeks. They really have returned to their HQs wherever they are in the world. Where they are in Sydney, they've returned to Sydney, or in Australia, in Melbourne. Also, obviously, inbound tourism, domestic tourism is very flat, and obviously universities are in a world of pain at the moment with their international students. So the sectors where momentum is moving away is in fintech, banking, tourism, and international students. But the sectors where momentum is coming to us are in advanced manufacturing, and particularly the sectors of aerospace and defence, medtech, medical device making, the R&D innovation end of freight and logistics, and subsectors like agribusiness. So if you just think for a moment about the Fortune 500 companies of the world. Most of those companies over the last 20 years have focused on Central Asian economies to locate most of their ecosystem and their supply chains for advanced manufacturing. What we are starting to see is the most innovative clutch of those Fortune 500 companies are interested in looking at jurisdictions like New South Wales and Sydney. I might say it's not just us. They're also having a look at Victoria. They're also having a look at the Canadian cities, the Scandinavian cities, and from what we can tell, the west coast of the US. But in general terms, they are jurisdictions on the edge of the world. And these places, like us, have a lower sovereign risk, access to trained workforce, a rule of law, nice places to live, but they are higher on the cost curve. So we've gone from 25 odd deals in the pipeline to over 50 deals in 1 month in the height of COVID. Now these are, the Premier has made announcements in previous times about a number of these companies that are interested in investing in the Aerotropolis. It's not just the Aerotropolis anymore. It's the Aerotropolis, Westmead and Tech Central, and also strategic locations in regional New South Wales like Williamtown, like Parkes and like Wagga. But it's not 50 places. If we're going to be successful at coagulating the best businesses in the world with the best universities we've got to offer, with the highest trained workforce, then we have to pick winners. And that's what I'm trying to manage in Treasury and what I'm trying to bring into the Greater Sydney Commission. So if you think about our industrial lands, less than 10% of total metropolitan Sydney are zoned for industrial, for employment lands. These are the places where I believe we have a rainbow moment in front of us, a new dawn for advanced manufacturing in Sydney. Now, we're not going to make cars, we're not going to make refrigerators, but we can make componentry of the subsectors that I just described a little earlier. So we really need to think about our industrial areas in a completely new way in a post-COVID period. I was doing a bit of research on the weekend about what happened in the decade after the Second World War, where Australia invented a lot of household activities that we live with these days, and where we had high levels of innovation. A sort of funny story that some of you may have read on the weekend is that fantails were invented as part of the post-Second World War innovation, but that wasn't just about eating more sugar. That was about encouraging people to go to movies, to if you like, experience the nighttime economy in Sydney back 70 years ago. Maybe we should be focusing on the fantails of the 2020s in the period in front of us. So 1 is data, 2 is bringing utilities into city build, 3 is around reconceiving our industrial lands and our distributed city. The 4th area that I think we need to really think about very carefully is the Commission has played a leadership role in the city deal in Western Sydney. We are getting close to announcements about, or potential announcements around the city deal. Western Sydney is one of our most important regional growth areas in the country and possibly one of the most important in the world. We want to keep focusing on Western Sydney, but we have a WACA that's been established, a Western Sydney and Aerotropolis Authority in Western Sydney. We really think we need to give more attention as our 4th priority to the central city. the sort of post-GPOP work that Lucy has been leading from Greater Parramatta to the Olympic Peninsula, and particularly focusing on the Westmead Parramatta part of that, because we have an opportunity in that part of Sydney to really create a major international medtech, medical device making precinct if we act as a collaborative unit. So we're not leaving Western Sydney, but we think we need to focus a little more on what I would call turbocharging the central city. So those first four really are about metropolis trends, the trends of data post-COVID, the trends of utilities, the trends of industrial land and advanced manufacturing in the central city. The fifth and final one that I'm very keen to focus the Commission on, and to some degree, Gabrielle and Michael, we've kind of partially stolen your stellar work in the Committee for Sydney around the reclaiming the high streets, is really about localness. I think we can all feel, and Sarah spoke about, the importance of localness, not just for this immediate 2 to 3 to 4 month period, but perhaps forever. What is the role of CBDs? What is the role of strategic centres? What are the roles of neighbourhood centres? And we really see this combination of an increasing focus on the economics of neighbourhood centres, the placemaking of neighbourhood centres, the nighttime economy, the use of public libraries, not just as libraries, but as our core meeting place, the place where we job match in local areas. So we really believe local economies and communities and the rise of the importance of neighbourhood centres, very, very important. Perhaps we should be thinking about hub locations, and maybe the public sector needs to lead here, hub locations for people to work in part-time. I think it's a fallacy to say that everybody's happy working from home. If you've got an office at home and access, as Sarah said, to the digital world, maybe it's okay working from home. But if you're in a 2-bedroom apartment with 5 people living in there and there are 3 people underemployed or working, it's not so easy working from home. So maybe we need to be rethinking the Bankstowns and the Campbelltowns and the Liverpools and the Penriths and the Gosfords and the Hills and the blah, blah, blahs as we move forward as hub places for partial employment for people in the new world order of work. So look, that's enough from me. None of these are locked down yet. I've really wanted to share with you my early thinking, but the 5, just to summarise, and I think they're now on the screen, for the Commission to really be at the vortex of accelerating Greater Sydney's economic recovery, for it to focus on being the central repository for data and policy reform, to think about utilities and multi-utilities in a city building way rather than a delivering utility way, to locking in our advanced manufacturing potential, to focusing on the central city, and to really honour and catapult local economies and communities through their neighbourhood centre. So Gabrielle, that's, I think, enough from Sarah and I. We'd be happy to take any questions that people want us to. We're here till at least 8 o'clock tonight if you want us to be. That was a joke.
Okay. Well, we're gonna thank you so much, and we've got 26 more minutes for discussion, questions and answer. Everybody, please feel free to submit via the Q&A app on Zoom. I will do my best to get through them, and I will sort them and combine them. We already have many coming in. So first of all, a question, what is the role of district plans and the overall Sydney strategic plan in moving forward these agenda ideas? The GSC has played a major role in in driving district plans and local plans to make sure that they match the metropolitan vision. So how do those need to change now?
I think the first thing we'd like to say is that we have a foundation for our city, which we now realise is more critical than ever. And those district plans are based on that 3-city vision. So we really need to accelerate towards delivering those plans and many of the elements that they put forward. So far from throwing the baby out with the bathwater, now more than ever we need to be focusing on delivering the vision that they have generated, and that is very much around the local, around job containment, reducing our need to travel, connecting with community, a diversity of outcomes within easy access. So the 30-minute city is absolutely critical, and COVID has taught us how important that is. There's no doubt, though, that we need to check in with some of the assumptions that we've made. We know, for example, immigration will change substantially over the next 12 months, 18 months, maybe longer. And we need to think what that means for demand for housing, the diversity of jobs and a range of things. So that's very much to our number one, the need to go back and check what the city-making implications are of COVID. But by all means, we are in an enviable position globally of having a foundation, a strategy that really COVID-19 backs in and makes us realise how critical it is.
Gabrielle, can I just add to that? We do have a moment in time right now where we have our region plan, our district plans and our local plans all more or less aligned. We have never been in that position before. Surely to goodness, this isn't a time to throw any of those out. But what we've got to do is iterate them, and what we've got to do is catapult the implementation of them. That's the focus of the Commission. On the full Commission, we have 5 secretaries that sit on the full Commission with our non-executive commissioners. So Jim Betts from the DPI cluster. DPI's focus in the next 18 months is around housing and around place. We will enable that, we will help them with that, but we're not going to confuse that. Our focus is around the economics of place. Treasuries is around international investment and fiscal management. Transport's around transport. So what I see, what I'll be trying to bring as the Chief Commissioner is that everybody is very clear on the role and the part that they are playing in the pie to take advantage of New South Wales' stellar international management of the health pandemic phase and to really get us into recovery as one of the first jurisdictions in the world.
Great. Economists for many years have focused on the productivity benefits of agglomeration, bringing lots of talented people together as one of the drivers of urbanization, one of the drivers of increases in density in central business districts. If the plan is now to move to a more distributed model or to promote localness, does that mean that the economists were wrong or overstating the benefits of agglomeration, or does it mean it's okay to accept a little bit of a hit to productivity?
Yeah, look, I don't think anyone was wrong in terms of the benefits of agglomeration and the bump factor and co-location, all well established.
You need to talk louder. Okay,
sure, sorry. They're all well established and well researched and certainly well calculated over the decades. But things are different now, and we need to rethink how we improve connectivity, how we improve the clustering, but in a different way, in a COVID-safe way. And I think that's a really critical question that I pose around how we manage that going forward. So there will still be a role for our clusters, there will still be a role for the benefits of agglomeration, but how we manage that in a COVID-safe way is the new challenge and transition that we're going through at the moment. And how long that lasts for, well, these are all crystal ball issues, but we need to think very carefully how we protect the safety of people, but at the same time benefit from connections and clustering from a connectivity point of view, a digital connectivity, and how we better connect people. And maybe our neighbourhoods and our local centres are part of the answer, and the need to retrofit them, as we were saying, and reclaim the high street in that way.
Just to push further talk about clustering, Gabrielle, actually the evidence of the last decade hasn't been about CBDs mainly. It's been about edge CBD districts, the sort of tech central precincts of the world, and in London and in New York. You know that better than anybody. I think there's a challenge in Sydney to become better at less, to become more specialised. I think we've tried, we haven't been bold enough to link our industry policy and strategy with place. And that's the opportunity we have moving forward. That, and Greg Clark talks about this all the time, the Sydney brand is the sort of one night city, really. We don't have a sophisticated brand for the first city, second city and third city, or the metropolis. This is the moment in time where we need to be building the third city as our advanced manufacturing space, freight and logistics, defence brand, our second city around medtech, nuclear medicine, around solving blood cancers, and our first city around ICT innovation, creative industries and so on. So I think we need to be bolder in order to not try and do everything for everyone, and in the process not to have as much agglomeration as perhaps we would have had to if we were an omnibus sort of blobby city, which I think we've to some degree been today.
Several questions have come in about climate. Do you think COVID provides the opportunity to accelerate action on climate change, and what role would you like for the GSC in that?
We need to remember that we've had 3 1-in-100-year shocks in less than 12 months with the flood, the bushfires and the pandemic. It was only 3 months ago that we were all talking about climate resilience as the most important issue, and some of us might say that resilience is the sort of meta issue that sits over the top of our challenge for the next 2 years. Climate is critical in all 5 of the priorities I spoke about. So in data, resilience is critical. In the utilities, surely we need to be pushing our utilities to climate neutrality. The advanced manufacturing potential is around travelling less, more of us travelling less to get to our work, and about the circular economy and industries of the future, the sort of Cities 4.0 agenda, the central city. You think about places like Camellia, and you think about the potential for places like Camellia to really provide a focus for climate and for circular economy outcomes. And local communities is, you know, the old adage of think global, act local logic that's been around for 20 or 30 years. So it is a critical underpinning, as is social inclusion. So I don't want people to use economics in a capital E way. We're not thinking of it like that. We're thinking about people, about social inclusion, about climate, about open space, about biodiversity through the lens of our economic recovery, because that's the biggest issue we have in front of us at the moment.
Great. Some of the trends that seem to be emerging may pose significant challenges for the Eastern Harbour City. If people with office jobs end up working from home in much greater numbers in an ongoing way, if people are reluctant to get onto trains and buses, or simply if the economy decentralizes to some of these nodes around Greater Sydney. Given those potential challenges, what is your vision for the Eastern Harbour City?
Well, we always think of the Eastern Harbour City as having some critical contributions to not only Greater Sydney's economy, but the Australian economy. A substantial contribution to it, job generation, diversity of uses, our cultural centres are ours. So it will have a critical role. Will it change? Well, most likely, yes, as a result of this. And that is something that we need to be very mindful of. And our friends, for example, at Transport for New South Wales are managing that in real time at the moment and what that means. Do we need it to change initially? Yes. We can't go back to the old normal next week of everyone coming into the CBD for work because we need to manage a more COVID-safe approach to our environment. But in time, we certainly want to see the growth of the CBD and its economic success continue very strongly. It's critical to our city, it's critical to our global reputation. But more and more, we need to balance that, and that's what the three cities is about. It's balancing that across complementary roles of our three cities, talking to each other with those economic clusters and strengths that each of them very much play to, but also the diversity of housing, the diversity of choice, the diversity of open spaces, the diversity of recreational opportunities across our city. And that's our job. That's our job to really balance that out, but certainly not at the cost of the Eastern City. It needs to remain strong. It's critical to our economic success.
Just a particular example of an area that we probably think has been underdone in the Eastern City is the precinct around Kingsford Smith Airport and Port Botany. These are they're probably our two most important international gateways. Now, we've just shut down, effectively, Kingsford Smith Airport for who knows how long, but certainly a few months now. And the question of how we reboot that and how we link industry around Kingsford Smith and Port Botany to help its rebooting is an example of an Eastern City strategy that the Commission will be very focused on. We've been focusing on the aerotropolis around our second airport for the last 4 or 5 years. I think it's about time we started using that funny word aerotropolis to do with our first airport, given that it's in lockdown and it's under great stress right now. We had the Sydney Airport people in the other day to talk to them. I mean, that business is just in a world of pain right now, as I'm sure your listeners would know. So that's an example of how we need to rethink the economic, social and environmental attributes of each of our three cities. So the new haves and the have-nots, the sort of logic that the Eastern City is a have and the Western Sydney is a have-not is not necessarily going to play out in certain subsectors of our community. And we need to be alive to that. But Kingsford Smith and Port Botany, if there are people online that want to talk to us about that, I'd welcome that conversation. It's just an obvious thing we should be focusing on. We probably should have been focusing on that a little more in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Several questions about industrial lands. Given the opportunities you're seeing in terms of expansion of advanced manufacturing, in terms of business recruitment, does anything need to change with regard to industrial land policy or supply?
To put this in perspective, non-residential areas zoned for urban uses across the city are around 8%. So 8% of our city can be developed for non-residential uses or doesn't allow residential, our employment areas. We are experiencing a major economic shift, change, point in time where we need to generate a diversity of jobs. But we've also realised how critical the supply chain is for the resilience of our city. These areas play an important role in a diversity of jobs, and indeed from decades of research we underestimate really the diversity of those jobs in the area and their contribution to our city. They're important as back of house for our CBDs and ensuring that we're generating strong growth in our global city. They're also important for our day-to-day activities as residents and citizens of Greater Sydney. But they're critical also for the country more generally and our resilience. And as I said, we've just learned how critical that is in light of the current situation. So going forward, we want to change the misconception around policies that the Greater Sydney Commission has put in place through our plans and work very closely with local government to test and to verify. We want to change the perception that we're sterilising these areas. Far from that, we want them to grow and thrive and be optimised. And certainly the work that Geoff's doing is really pointing to the fact of how critical they are to our international investment. That safe, good governance approach to our city and those employment areas are critical for that growth and the diversity of jobs. But also the question about where they are in the city. So we had a lot of challenges early on about, look, let's move them all to the Western city. Why do we need a diversity across the city? As Greg Clark was saying last week, and certainly a lot of the research is showing, the mix of these areas across the city as we now take a far more local approach is very important, not only from an economic cost point of view, a traffic congestion point of view, but also we need a local diversity of jobs and services being provided. So we're really keen to really take a shift change in the story around our employment areas. Really, they're not areas, as I said, to be sterilised, they're areas to be optimised, and they're areas to really transition to a whole diversity of uses. And that may be higher density, that may be quicker approvals, that may be a diversity of support services, so they're more attractive places to work, and not just the backwater of our cities and the forgotten places.
Great. Several questions about transport have come in and wondering about whether the GSC will be an influencer on transport strategy for Greater Sydney. Will COVID present an opportunity for Sydney to finally move away from the traditional road building projects, maybe pursuing strategies more like you see in London or New York to drive a big mode shift towards cycling? And will you guys have a role in promoting any of those changes?
So can I take this one? We were the first group in 2018 to pull together metropolitan planning and transport planning under the one banner. Rod Staples is a commissioner of the Greater Sydney Commission, and Sarah and I were only speaking to Rod last week, and his planning leads, many of whom you know. And yes, the short answer is we are completely in lockstep, not just with transport, but with Infrastructure New South Wales. Infrastructure New South Wales, like the GSC, both report to the Premier. And the question of how we reprofile our infrastructure pipeline, which is currently happening, is something that the Commission will be involved with intimately. And I think you can see from the priorities that I've spoken about today, the priority around active transport and around multimodal economic hubs that facilitate social cohesion and environmental outcomes, very, very important. So yes, we will be in lockstep with those people. I would say though, Gab, one thing we didn't quite achieve in 2018 was complete lockstep with some of our other agencies of government as we hurtle towards 2022, 2023, when we need to be thinking about the next iteration of our plans. Let's make sure, and let's your listeners make sure you push us to make sure that our health and our education and our justice and all the areas of making a city are brought together in a single place. That would be, I think, our dream. We made a major step in 2018. We've still got some way to go to make sure that that's totally integrated.
All right, let me make this be the last question, and apologies everybody, there are many, many questions, but as two of the leading voices on the future of cities, what would you say to people who are wondering if cities are safe? To people who are asking questions about whether this whole idea of density done well might actually be a dangerous idea in an era of infectious diseases. What is the right balanced way to think about the future of cities in light of these fears people have?
I think, look, the early research is showing that certainly there's some very high profile, high density cities that are struggling at the moment to manage this as effectively as Sydney has. But it's not necessarily a correlation with the density, and there's many other factors at play. So we need to be careful about drawing conclusions too quickly. One thing I will say though is that this current situation really draws us to think differently about how we design our cities, our infrastructure, our places, to make sure that they can be safer places from a health point of view, that they allow us to distance ourselves more on the footpath, that we have lifts or cores within buildings that allow us to have more than 2 people accessing at a point in time within a lift. The infrastructure of our cities, social and economic, will need to adjust in light of this and in light of the thinking that many people will have. I think initially we will see some shifts in how people behave across our city. I think, and I hope that we'll have a more measured approach in terms of people who can work at home, and let me say not everyone, certainly not everyone can, but those who can will be responsible and manage that transition. And I'm interested to see whether we will have more people live further out from the CBD, given that they don't have to commute into whether it's Parramatta CBD or Western City CBD or the Eastern CBD on a regular basis. And I think that creates new opportunities for a diversity across our city and a diversity across the regions that as planners we've been trying to encourage for decades. So I think there's a real opportunity. Whether we talk a lot about this over the next few months or years and then we revert back is an interesting question. And I believe as city planners, as city makers, we have a duty to leverage the positive behavioural changes that we're now seeing to shape our city in the best possible way. And that's the work we're keen to do. That's what we want to hear from your members, Gabe. We want to hear from our stakeholders, and we're working really closely with our government colleagues to test and to challenge in that way.
Great. Could I add a less technical and another view around this, and this is around city governance? I think what this moment in time has created is the benefits of working together. You can see that at the national cabinet level. We've got to start thinking about cities as places for people, and we really have to, I think, take this moment in time and think about how we are governing our city on the horizontal dimension, not on the vertical dimension, which state governments and frankly local governments and federal governments do a lot. So the question of place management, not at individual small places, but across the 3 cities, across the metropolis, how we relate to our region, to Newcastle, Central Coast, Illawarra, Western New South Wales and the world. I think we've proven to ourselves that we can actually outperform if we work together. In cities, in Australian cities, particularly in Sydney, the first iteration of the Greater Sydney Commission was a major achievement by Minister Stokes and the people around Minister Stokes that helped do that, but it wasn't designed to be the end state. We've got several other iterations of that to go, and we're alive to those possibilities, and we'd love to talk to you and your members about what those possibilities might be. Because if we do it well, we have less constraints on density and on how we operate in the city than if we do it in the business as usual way. So thank you.
All right. I want to thank both of you for taking time to talk to us. We had hundreds of people on this meeting, so clearly people are interested in what you're doing. We are very appreciative of both of you for your leadership and thoughtfulness as always. So we will look forward to staying in close touch.
And so will we. We're really keen to stay connected and to hear people's thoughts. So please reach out to us and give us your feedback.
Everybody, thank you for joining Committee for Sydney Live today, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.